Good evening.
There we
8:40. Tonight we're learning
8:40.
Shekalim Daf Kaf Aleph, and we're going to be starting halfway down or halfway up on Chaf Amud Beis, really just above the halfway mark at the words Kishe Kohen Miskar Tchila La'avoda. This is a brisa, and what we're going to be discussing now is some of the precursor work that needs to be done before a Kohen would begin his work as a Kohen. This brisa will then lead into a whole slew of other sugyas, and we're going to be ending at the bottom of Chaf Aleph Amud Beis at Halacha Gimel, and then tomorrow night, Amir Hashem, for the siyum, we'll start right there and then finish up the parak. The siyum is at 8. We'll be starting Daf Yomi punctually at 8:40 at Mark's house, 2910 Birchwood. And if anyone wants to sign up, we still have the ability to add to the food because it's hot dogs, hamburgers, and ribs. It's not so complicated, so we'll be able to add. So let's get started. Chaf Amud Beis, just about halfway down. Let's go. When a Kohen would begin to do his avoda, he'd begin to do the service in the Mishkan. He would first have to bring the asiri sa'ifa, a tenth of an ephah of flour. It was considered a korban-esque type of hava'ah. And va'ovda biyado, he would make it himself. Says the Gemara, echad kohen gadol, ve'echad kohen hedyot. Whether or not you're talking about the kohen gadol or a kohen hedyot, she'avdu. What happens if they did their avoda, but they forgot? It's kind of like punching in when you get to the office. But let's say they forgot to do the asir se'ifa of their own. Says the Gemara, says the Brisa, halfway down Chaf Amud Beis, avodasam kshera. It doesn't invalidate all of the avodos that they did in the absence of the asir se'ifa. Yes, it should be done, but it is not, as we say in the learning world, it is not le'ikuva, it is not me'akev the avoda of that day. And even if they did not bring the asir se'ifa, the halacha is that it would still be perfectly kosher. The Gemara continues halfway down on Chaf Amud Beis as follows. Rabbi Mana Bai, he asked the following, Bai Meimar, he wanted to say the following. Bo bayom sheniskar tchila la'avoda, bo bayom nisman elios kohen gadol. Let's say that a Kohen comes into the office, he comes into the Beis HaMikdash, he's about to start his avoda, and then he finds out he's also going to become the Kohen gadol. Oh, that's a great day. You got a nice promotion. You go from being a regular Kohen to a Kohen gadol. Now, in the times of the second Beis HaMikdash, a lot of Kohanim died. It was not Geshmak. A lot of Kohanim Gedolim died. So not a pashut thing to be a Kohen Gadol. So with great power comes great responsibility. There were a lot of people who did not make it. Anyways, what would happen in this case when a Kohen who would come to the Beis HaMikdash found out that not only was it his mishmar, but also that he was the Kohen Gadol, so the halach is maybe shtayim, he would then have to bring He would then have to bring two asiri sa'ifas. I distracted myself. I've never done that before. This is like surround sound. So maybe shtayim, the halacha is that the Kohen would have to bring two asiri sa'ifas, achas lechinucho, one for his new appointment, achas lechovas hayom, and one because he's a Kohen, he's doing his avoda, and that is the end of that brisa. The Gemara now speaks in detail about the asiri sa'ifa, and the Gemara points out that there's a strange word in the pasuk. The pasuk has the words tufine, and in reading the whole pasuk, the pasuk reads, where did it go? Here it is. The pasuk reads as follows: Al machavat bashemen teasem or beches tiviena tufine minchas pitim takri reach nichoach lashem. So what does the word tufine mean? So says the Gemara, we're going to define this word. Tufine, halfway down on Chaf Amud Beis, tufine b'shas hava'a tufine, that when it is brought, it should be tufine, it should be baked. It says if it's going to be brought in the afternoon as the first time, ve'im b'shachar tufine, it seems to imply that it wasn't going to be baked in the morning. However, vatanin and ha'amidu, it says in the Mishnayos in Tamid, ha'amidu oseh chavitin la'asos chavitin. Someone was appointed in the morning to go make these foods, so it seems like it was baked in the morning. So which one was it? Was the asiri se'ifa baked in the morning, or was it not? The answer is the Gemara, Reb Chia bar Acha, the mission Maseches Tamid was only coming to teach us that he came there to boil the water, not really to actually do the baking of the asir se'ifa. So no, it's not a contradiction. Yes, it was baked in the evening and not in the morning. Says the Gemara, what does the word tufine mean? It's a very strange word. It's not like a regular word you find in the Torah. If you wanted to say bake, say te'afena. We have that. Let's say afia. We have that as a pasuk in Chumash somewhere. So says the Gemara, tufine. Rav Yasa b'shem Reb Chanina metagna va'achar kach ofe osa. It says first you fry it and then you bake it. Tigun in halacha, fascinating shaila in halacha. Do we consider tigun, which is frying, to be eligible for the iser of basar b'chalav? The nafkamin would be if you own stock in McDonald's. So we know, of course, that basar b'chalav is an isur deraisa to make, an isur deraisa to eat, and an isur deraisa to get hana from. That's why it says the pasuk in the Torah 3 times. Lo sevashel gedi b'chalev imo. The Tur in Shulchan Aruch and Yoreh De'ah identifies these 3 psukim and says what each of them are all about. So can you get hana? Can you be a beneficiary of the stock market of owning? Well, it depends. Because is it really bishul? Bishul is cooking in a liquid medium. It's like taking cheese and putting it in a cholent and stirring it all up. That's mamish bishul. But what about tigun? It's a frying pan, right? And you have your hamburger and you put a piece of cheese on top. Is that considered bishul doraisa? Or is that just considered tigun, which is not bishul doraisa? What's the difference? Hana. Can you get benefit from it? Because the only time that the hana of basar v'chalav is problematic is when the bishul was problematic. So if the bishul is not bishul and it's tigun, so the poskim discussed that. That's an interesting shayla. Anyways, in regards to this case, Rabbi Yasa says that first it was fried and then it was baked, the Asir Saifa. And Ravacha b'shem Rabbi Chanina ofel sa be'achar kach matagna. He says the opposite, that it was actually first baked and it was then fried. So it was double cooked, right? Not using cooked as a loose term. First and foremost, it was either fried and then baked, or vice versa. It was baked and then fried. Machlokas in the Gemara, and we're going to connect this to the following machlokas. It says the Gemara 2/3 of the way down. Chaf Beis tufine. Here's what the play on words actually means. Te'afena na. It should be cooked na. You guys remember what na means from Maseches Psachim? Partially cooked. Word na means partially cooked. It's not fully cooked. It's still a ways to go. Rabbi Omer, however, te'afena is te'afena na'eh. It should be made beautiful. And says the Gemara that these are connected machlokos. Rabbi Dosa Omer te'afena riba. This is the third shita, and then we'll connect the machlokas. Rabbi Dosa says it should be te'afena riba. It should be cooked in multitudes. It should be cooked in many ways. So he says that some should be this way, some should be that way. So it should be cooked a lot. And then says the Gemara as follows. Asyan Elaine Palgivasa. This first machlokas is Kihinin Palgivasa. It's like the second machlokas. How are they all connected? Manda Amar Te'afena Na'a. According to the one who says that it should be baked beautifully, that's Kimanda Amar Ofe V'achar Kach Matagna. That first you should bake it first, because when you first fry something, it gets blackened at the bottom. So that's not beautiful. That's not Na'a. So if the word tufine means Te'afena Na'a, then it's implying that you should first bake it, because then at least it looks good. Fine, but the other way is not true. Manda Amar Te'afena, no, that it should be partially cooked. He doesn't care if it looks as nice. Then that is Kamanda Amar Mitagna Ba'achar Kach Ofa, and the Gemara connects those two machlokos to say that the one who thinks that it should look nice, the afia comes first. The one who says it should be partially cooked, the frying, the tigun comes first. Now we were speaking about this Kohen who has an obligation to bring the Asiri Saifa. So the Gemara says as follows: Lo Sof Davar Shemes is the only case where his family members or where the tzibur would have to bring something in his stead is if he dies. Ela afilu nitzma v'afilu nidcha mimum. Let's say that a Kohen is removed from his avoda because he becomes tameh, or let's say that he's nidcha because he has a mum. Right? He gets injured in such a way where halachically speaking, he has a mum. So answers the Gemara Tani and skip the parentheses. Rabbi Yehuda Bar Pazi, Davar Dale ve'afilu nidcha mimum. He agrees that even if it's nidcha mimum, that would be a reason why someone else should bring a korban on behalf of this particular kohen. Minayin lekohen gadol shemeis v'lominu achar tachtav shetei minchas akrevim mishal yorshim. How do we know that in a scenario where a kohen gadol dies, and v'lominu achar tachtav, they have yet to appoint a new kohen gadol, shetemen minchaso, that his korban has to be brought mishal yorshim, from his family members and not from the actual Beis HaMikdash fund. Remember what we've been talking about for the last 20 blot effectively is budgeting. We've been talking about money, the income, and the expense lines of the Beis HaMikdash. Okay, well, this happened all the time that a Kohen was passed away during his avodah as a Kohen Gadol. So now we're saying it's Shel Yorshim. How do we know that the Beis HaMikdash is not responsible for paying, that it's family members? Answers the Gemara 10 lines from the bottom of Chaf Beis, Hamalomar Mibanav Yaseh Osa. Very clear. The pasuk writes that from his children, Mibanav Yaseh Osa, that it should come from his children. Yachal Yuviena Lachatzain. Maybe we should only bring half because there's no need to bring the whole one. He died. He made part of his shift was over, so he should only bring half. Tamalomar Osa Kula Amarti. Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda is of the opinion that no, that even if he were to die, we would still bring the full asiri sa'ifa. Reb Shimon Omer Eina Ba El Mishal Tzibor. I disagree. The Yorshim don't pay for it. Who pays for the asiri sa'ifa, the korban that needs to be brought in after a Kohen Gadol dies? Says the Gemara, that does not come from the family. That comes from the budgeting of the Beit Hamikdash. Mishal Tzibor Shenemar Chokolam Mishe Habris Krusalo. The bris is not with the Kohen Gadol. The bris is with Klal Yisrael. And because the bris is krusa with Klal Yisrael, that the Beit Hamikdash should serve as a kapara, so therefore they are the ones who should pay for it for the Kohen Gadol, and that's why they're going to be obligated. It's not the Yorshim of the Kohen Gadol. So that's the Machlokas. Reb Shimon, Reb Yehuda. Reb Shimon is the one who says it's going to be tzibur, and we're going to come back to his shita momentarily. Finishes up the drasha of Reb Shimon, Kalil Toktar, that it should be fully offered to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Kalil Lahaktar. The whole thing goes up on the Mizbeach. Kohen Gadol Shemei, says the Gemara 3 lines from the bottom. Wait a minute. Rabbi Ba Bar Mamel Boy, he says, wait a minute, Nichlafa Shitse de Reb Shimon. It seems to be that the sheet of Reb Shimon needs to be switched around. Why? Because Taman over there, namely in the brisa that we just read a few lines ago, what did Reb Shimon say? In our is it a different Mishnah, not here. I quoted that wrong. Taman over there in another Mishnah, Amar Mishal Yorshin, that the children of the Kohen Gadol have to pay when he needs to bring a korban. V'hacha, the brisa that we just saw above, Amar Mishal Tzibor. So which one is it? You can't have it both ways. We have to decide, tachlis, where's the money coming from? The Kohen Gadol died, and there was no minui in his place, and no one else has been appointed. Who's paying for the korban of the asir seifa? So Reb Shimon can't say both. You have to pick one. So answers the Gemara. Last 2 words on Chaf Amud Beis. Amar Reb Chia, turning to the top of Chaf Aleph Amud Aleph Bar Ba below Yehusu Maksha. Isn't that a great question? I don't think we've ever seen this in Babli. It's a great line. Somebody asks a question, and then the Gemara bothers to spend the time like, yeah, taka. That's a really good question, but that's what it means right here. Lo Yesu Maksha. Take a look at the Korban Ha'id on the top of the page. Dibra Hamatzka. Lo Yesu Maksha. Bitmiya. Tivadai Shaper Kamakshi. Oh, beautiful. And then he gives another shot that no, it's Benichusa. So there's a machlokas as to what's actually going on here. It's not so pashut as to what's going on here, but the pashtus of the Gemara seems to be, when you read it in its flow, it seems to be that it really is. It seems to be that he's asking a good question. Anyways, also Rabbi Yaakov bar Achoy, Rabbi Abahu b'shem Rabbi Yochanan, Davar Torah hu shetehei ba min hatzibur. Mida oraisa. Really, halachically speaking, everyone agrees. Rabbi Shimon is masking that on a Torah level, who's obligated to pay for the korban of the Kohen Gadol who dies? The answer is the tzibur. We're going to include the parentheses here, much smoother with the parentheses than without. Third line, Chaf Aleph Amud Aleph, and Kevan dechazi deka midcha kalishka. But once they saw that yes, the tzibur was obligated to pay, but it was really hurting the finances of the Beis Hamikdash because so many Kohanim Gedolim were dying, unfortunately. Hayisi Omer Yigvula Min Yorshim. Then they instituted against the Din D'Oraisa, not in contrast. It's not usher for other people to pay for it, but it's if no one else would pay for it, then the Mikdash would have to pay. Then they changed gears a little bit, and they said that now the Yorshim of the Kohen Gadol would have to pay it. So now we're talking about the Asir Sa'efa, which is a flour-based korban that he would have to bring. It wasn't just that. It was also with oil, and it was also with wine. It was whatever it was. I don't know how to answer that question. I don't know what the dollar value was on a Asir Seifa. But it was the Mefarshim right that there were 300 Kohanim Gedolim who died, and the budget was tight to start with. So it's not like they were already. This was. I don't have a real answer for you, Gerald, but as I reflect back on the last many blot and seeing what goes where, the budget was pretty sophisticated. I don't know. You think your question's better than my answer. But anyways, the Gemara says that when they saw the Midcha Kalishka, 4th line, so then that really they should be collecting from the families. The Beis Hamikdash can't handle the finances. Once they saw that the families were being irresponsible and negligent with this, then they changed back to Hitzkinu, and this is the new Reb Shimon, so it flip-flopped. Reb Shimon first wanted it to be he really wanted it to be what the pasuk was in Chumash, that it should be from the Mishkan, but it was very hard on the budgeting. So then they ended up switching to the Yorshim, and then they flipped back because the Yorshim were not doing their obligations. They weren't. It's so hard to imagine. It's so hard to imagine living in a time of the Beis Hamikdash and not being excited about doing the avoda. I mean, listen, it's like anything else that we get used to. Like we don't always daven and shul nicely because we're used to it, But it's like so hard on the brain to imagine that this was a gift. The pashiba, they were negligent on bringing a korban. Just it's not a judgment. It's just hard to understand. Says the Gemara, 5th, 6th line, Rabbi Yosa, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Bai Mahu. What is the din in the following? Shlema b'shachris b'shlema bein ha'arbaim. Would they bring the full asiri seifa in the morning and another full one in the afternoon when they were doing so on behalf of the Kohen Gadol who passed away? Oh, shlema b'shachris ubetela min ha'arbaim, or the full one in the morning and then nothing in the afternoon. They brought the whole asiri seifa, but they didn't split it. And then the Gemara says, "Kad pshita," even if you think it's so obvious, to chsiv minchas tamid, which implies that we should give the whole thing. Even if that's true, fine. Then what about the oil? Shloshas lugan mahim. Do we say shloshas lugan shachris or shloshas lugan bein harbaim? It's 3 lugan for each, both morning and afternoon. Oh, do we say log umechza? It's divided in half. 1.5 shachris with log umechza bein harbaim. And then the Gemara says we have to ask even more because we also added lavona, which was frankincense, to this korban. And it says, Amar Reb Chizkiya, of hadat tzricha le. We even need to ask here. The Gemara here says tzricha, and we've seen this already in this Masechta, that in this case, the word tzricha means to ask. We also have to ask on the following, Shnei komtzen. How do we know the right amount for lavona? Mahin, do we say shnei komsen b'shachris or shnei komsen bein ha'arbaim, that the lavona that we add to this korban, we do 2 kmitzas. Remember what we said, a kmitzah is a grip and then open the pinky and the thumb, whatever's in the palm of your hand under your middle 3 fingers. Do we do 2 of those throws or do we do 4 of those over the course of the day? Oh, do we say kometz achas b'shachris or kometz achas bein ha'arbaim? Just at an aggregate, it needs to be 2 kmatzim, but it doesn't have to be 2 at a time. Just 1 in the morning, 1 in the afternoon. So the Gemara starts to answer some of these questions. A third of the way down, Chafal Tamar Aleph Amar Reb Yosa, Klum lamdu lekometz lami minchas chote. Don't we learn all of this from minchas chote? Mala halan shnei komtzen, afkan shnei komtzen. This Gemara is very difficult because it's a very subtle detail, but a couple of blot ago, this Gemara was quoted differently. It's chaster kmitza. So the Meforshim are somewhat bothered by this line. And I think the Gra here adds in the word chaser to try and compensate for some of the gears. Nevertheless, the Gemara B'Pashtas here seems to indicate that we learn from Minchas Chote. And yes, it should be Shnei Kmitzas. It should be 2 Kmitzas of Levana. Skipping the parentheses, Amar Reb Chizkiya, Klum Lamdu Shloshas Lugan Lo Mitamish Al Bein Ha'arbaim. We also learned about the Shloshas Lugan. We learned that from the Korban Tamid. Malahalan Shloshas Lugan Avkan Shloshas Lugan. We need to do 3 at a time. So it says the Gemara, that's our answer. Matamon tzrichale. Just like over there, we asked that question. Afkan tzrichale. We asked the same question by the Tamid. We're going to ask the same question over here. So basically, we have some of our answers, and it seems to be we have some of our answers about how this Asir Seifa would be brought on behalf of the Kohen Gadol, based on the different sugyas of connecting Minchas Chote to our case of Asir Seifa and connecting the Tamid Bein Ha'arbaim to our case of Asir Seifa. We're at the 2 dots halfway down on Chaf Aleph Amud Aleph, heading toward the end of another parak. Yes, Baruch Hashem. Shelo Yihye. What is this talking about? Says the Gemara that if you look back in the Mishnah on Chaf Amud Aleph, we said that one of the gzeras that they made is that there would be no me'ila by the Efer HaPara. That's what this Gemara is referring to. Okay, let's dig in. Reb Shimon Bar Nachman b'shem Reb Yonasan b'din haya sheyim aluba. Really, there is me'ila by the animal itself, by the chatas itself, by the animal which is the para aduma. The hein gazru shelo yimaluba, and they wanted to make a gzera that there was no meila. Hold on one second. V'atani chatas melamed shemoalinba. The chatas itself, the para aduma, that is the animal upon which there's meila. Ba'am moalin, but only in the animal. The ein moalin ve'efara, but there is no meila with the efer hapara. So hold on one second. Mida Raisa, there's no me'ila with the Efer HaPara. But our Mishnah says that they made a gzera that there would be no me'ila by Efer HaPara. We don't need your gzera. That's Pasuk and Chumash. The Pasuk and Chumash already implies that by the Efer HaPara, that there is no problem of me'ila. So what was going on in our Mishnah that we thought that there should be the removal of the concern of me'ila by the Efer HaPara? Answers the Gemara 6 lines before the end of the parak. Amar Rabbi Abo, Barishona, Hayu Mishtashkishin, Mishtakshikin, what they would do is they would take the Efer HaPara because it had healing powers. They were Mishtakshikin ba v'nochnu nosal gabe makosein. They were misusing, again, hard to fathom. They were misusing the Efer HaPara. They had a bad wound. They knew that there was something miraculous about the Efer HaPara. They would grab a little, mix it with water, make it a little pasty, and put it on a wound. So because people were misusing it, then the Gazer Sheimilu ba, they made a din derabanan, a rabbinic injunction against the use of the Efer HaPara for purposes other than Tumah V'Tara, because people were using it to heal wounds. And then they undid that zera. That's our Mishnah. Let's see the next line. Kevan Shenigdaru, once we saw that people began to put together back up, they started to be a little more strict and they stopped using the Efer HaPara for healing their own wounds. Gazru Shalo Yimaluba. They undid the zera that there should be Me'ila and said, okay, we're back to where we should be, that really there is no Isser of Me'ila. And that is the way we explain our Mishnah. Why does our Mishnah say that by the Efer Apara that there's no Me'ilah if the Pasuk says that? Because people were misusing it. So they instituted a Gzera D'Rabbanan that there is Me'ilah, and then they undid the Gzera D'Rabbanan. And now we're back to where back in the day, at that time, once they put up the appropriate Gedarim to stop using this as some type of salve for an injury, all went back to normal, that there's no Isser Me'ilah. The Alakinin, what about the money that was given for birds? And we saw this Gemara already, it's just quoted here in the appropriate context. We saw this just a couple of days ago, that if a woman were to give money as Kinin, if she were to give money for a korban for a bird, let's say she was a Yoledas, she had a baby, and after her Yemei Tohar, she brings a korban. Wonderful. The problem is that she gave money. Let's say she gave Daled Zuz, which the Gemara says is the price of a bird, and then the bird supplier brings in a bird, but the bird is puzzle. So what's she going to do for her kapara? She has to get that for her Yoleda. She was not going to be Yotze if the animal's puzzle. So then she gave her 4 Zuz, good for her, but the animal that was supplied doesn't have the right standing. The animal's a psul. So how does she get her kapara? So Amar Rabbi Yitzchak Tanai Bezdin it's a Tanai Bezdin to make sure that Shitaka does get her kapara. Here's how it worked. Let's say that I was a provider of chickens and birds to the Beis Hamikdash. They would take all of the money, divisible by 4, because every chicken was 4. They'd give me, let's say they'd give me, they give me 8 zuz. So I have to provide them with 2 birds. I give them 2 birds. One of them ends up being a psul. That's on me. I'm the seller of the birds. That's on me. I gave you a bad bird, so I have to bring you another one to make sure that woman gets her kapara. She paid to get the kinin. She paid to get the bird, so that for her you'll let this korban, that she could become tahora. She can get her kapara, not tahora. So she can get her kapara. So says the Gemara, don't worry about it. When the Kohanim would bring a bird, if the bird was a psul, then it would have to be replaced and another hakrava would be made in order to make sure that she would get what she needs. Hadran Allah Perak Mos and Imsu Yiratzim, which come back to this daf in 7.5 years. We're now learning the final parak, Baruch Hashem, Maseches Shekalim. Yeah, I don't think we ever should have said 3. It just kind of came out of my mouth the first time. If you make a chazaka that's betos, I think you're probably okay. So it says the Gemara, Kol Haroken. This is going to be speaking about saliva. And what's happening over here is something that we've learned about already, which is that a zav and a zava, the saliva of a zav and a zava, the roko v'zovo, the Gemara says, I think this is in Maseches Shabbos maybe, roko v'zovo of a zava has the same status as the zav or the zava. So if a zav or a zava spits, that has the same status in halacha as the zav himself or herself. So it's a very high level of status. And as well, and this is really what we're going to be focusing on, is that midirabanan, this is very important. It'll be very hard to understand the Gemara without this. Midirabanan, we treat the nachri as though they have a status of zav dirabanan, just like the rope, just like the spit. So that's where the Gemara comes in very importantly here. It says the Mishnah opening up 2/3 of the way down, 3/4 of the way down, Chaf Aleph, Amad Aleph at the new Perek, Kol Harokin, if anyone sees that there's some spit on the ground, halacha is tahorin, it's not problematic. Except for the upper shuk, a very particular location, as we will see soon in the Gemara, that area was treated as problematic. If they found rok there, that would be problematic. But Yossi Omer B'Shar Kol Yemos Hashana, throughout the year, here's how people would walk down the street. Because most people were tummy, they got the majority of the road. They would walk in the middle of the road. Again, not like our streets. They'd walk in the middle of the road. Shebet Stad and Tahor, and the people who were Tahor would walk on the sides. B'Shat HaRegel, it was inverted. At the times of the Beis HaMikdash, when people were bringing Korbanos Chagiga, Korbanos Pesach, whatever animals they were bringing, Shebe'em Tahorin, because whatever the majority was. Now, most people are Tahor because they have to bring a Korban. You have to make sure that you're Tahor to bring the Korban, so you were Tahor. Shebet Stad and Tmei, Mipnei Shahamu'atin Mistalkin Mistad. Whoever was the minority group, they would walk on the sides of the street. So if most people were Tahor, the Tmein would walk on the side. If most people were Tamim. We'll see in the Gemara how they communicated with one another. We'll see in this Mishnah how they communicated with one another. It says the Gemara, it's in the Gemara, not in this Mishnah, but we'll get to it. It says the Gemara, second half of the Mishnah, Kol HaKelim Hanim Tzayim Yerushalayim. Say, you're walking down the street, you find a kli. Is it tamei? Is it tar? So it says the Gemara, Derech Yirida LeBeis HaTfilah Tmein. If you see, or go to the mikvah, Kelim mikvah, people have boxes and plastic, right? All stickers everywhere, right? So let's say you're walking into the mikvah, and you see on the way in, you see a kli. The halacha is that one would be tamei, but the derech aliyah tahorin, but on the way out it wouldn't be problematic. And here's the key line: shelo ki ridasan aliyasan. They had a different exit than the entrance. So the mikvah that we have here on Tui for the kelim mikvah is one entrance in and out. It's one room. Just not a separate kelim. What? In Stama, they didn't have a separate kelim mikvah. But whatever they had set up, they had an in room, and then they come out on the other side. And that helped solve this problem. The fact that they had an entrance on one side, the mikvah, and then an exit on the other side solved this problem, which is that if you found the kli going into the mikvah, somebody dropped a spoon on the way into the mikvah, and it's still tameh. But on the way out, you can assume that they already brought it to the mikvah. It's a halachic assumption. And the spoon that you find on the other side of the mikvah, on the exiting door, so then the halacha is that that's not problematic. Shelo ki ridas and aliyasa. They had different doors for the yerida to go into the mikvah as they would to go out of the kelim mikvah. Rabbi Yossi Omer, absolutely not. Kulam Tahorin. All kelim are considered to be fine. And to get into the lungs, why would he say such a thing? If it's on the path, on the way to the mikvah, it should be tameh. Anyways, he says it's not tameh. What is tameh? Chutz, the only exceptions to that which should be tahor, the only things that are actually tameh are min hasal v'hamagrefa v'hamaritza hamiyuchadim l'kvaros. These were tools that they used for burial. So each one is different. Sal is a basket, a magrefa is a type of rake, a maritza some type of hammer, and all of these were miyuchad for kvaros. So I don't know what the equivalent would be for today. A shovel is not unique to anything. I don't know if there are any unique tools, maybe. But either way, that was the only exception. Big machlokas in the Tanaim, Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir says anything on the way into the mikveh would be problematic. And Rabbi Yossi says those are not problematic at all. What about a sakin? We saw this Gemara quoted elsewhere. If you find a knife, shenimtzeis b'yodalad on the 14th of Nisan, on that day, by then, says the Gemara, says the Mishnah, you can assume that that is tahor, shochet b'miyad. You don't have to do any tefillah. You find a shchita knife, and you have to shecht it. You have to shecht an animal. You can pick it up. You can use it. It's Yud Daled Nisan. However, b'shlosh asar, if you find it on Yud Gimel Nisan, the day prior to Erev Pesach, well, maybe the shochet didn't have time to be tovel, and therefore shonu matbil. You have to make sure that you are going to tovel it again. Kofitz, a kofitz is a meat cleaver. However, important to note, this meat cleaver was not serrated. It was a regular shchita knife. A shchita knife today, and all shchita knives forever, are always one smooth blade. They're not serrated like we see on some of our knives, because that would puzzle the animal most likely, because it can cut in a bumpy way. It can cause for a nick. It can cause for some problems. So anyways, that's why even if there's one tiny little nick in a knife, if you see that and then you do a shchita, the animal's an avela. That's really problematic. So that's why the Gemara in Chulin writes that a shochet has to check the shchita knife of bisra ve'atufra. He checks the knife on his flesh and on his nail. So he'll take, if this is a knife, he'll check it on his thumb, like running it on the side of the blade to make sure there's no nicks on both sides. And then he'll take the blade and run it on his nail, straight on his nail. It doesn't hurt if you got good nails. And if you feel any nicks, you're not allowed to do the shchita. So here we're not talking, when it says kofi, it's 2 lines from the bottom on chaf aleph amud aleph. It's not talking about a serrated knife. We're talking about a knife that they're planning to use for shchita. It just happens to be that it's a meat cleaver also. So there are different kinds of knives. If you've ever seen shchita knives for a chicken, they're pretty small. They look about this big. They're gorgeous. They're perfectly cut, and they're extremely sharp. I mean, the animal it's so smooth. Literally one cut and it'll cut straight through, perfect. But for cows, they're huge meat cleavers. They're huge nafkaminas in the size between a chicken and a cow. They're huge. So the kofitz would be more like the one used for a cow. Either way, if it's a kofitz, buy a kofitz, which is a meat cleaver, which is not what's normally used for shchita. So that has to be tovel even if you find it on Yud Dalet. What if the 14th was Shabbos? So now you can't take it to the mikvah, because to take it to the mikvah, just like you can't take kalim to the mikvah on Shabbos, because that's considered to be makev patish. You just made this a functional kli. We don't take kalim to the kalim mikvah on Shabbos. So Shaila, why are you allowed to take yourself to the mikvah on Shabbos? If it's matahir, you fine, whatever. So that's what the Gemara says, that if it's on chal arbas or lios b'Shabbos, then shochet b'miyad, even the kofitz you're allowed to do the shchita on. That takes us to the top of chaf aleph amud beis to speak about one more iteration, which is b'tes vav. What is the 15th? Can you use that shchita knife? Shochet b'miyad, no problem. You're allowed to do that, even if it was not, even if Friday was not, even if Yud Daled was not chal lios b'Shabbos. Fine. Nimsa kshura l'sakin. Let's say that they're both a regular shchita knife, and the kofitz, the meat cleaver, are on the same ring. They're connected to one another. You can assume the halacha is the same of one as it is with the other. Nimsa kshura l'sakin, harehi kisakin. Halacha is the same. Says the Gemara, what was going on in the upper shuk? It says Mishel Shuk Elyon. There, Rav Meir says that the rok is problematic. What was going on there? And this is where we run into this din that we saw. The Gemara opens 2 lines from the top of Chaf Aleph Amud Beis. Rav B'Shem Reb Shua ben Levi, Kitzron Shel Nachrim Hayasham. there was like a laundromat, some type of place where they were doing laundry, and that's where all the nachrim hung out. And remember the din derabanan that we treat a nachri like a zav. This is among many other rabbinic injunctions between us and nachrim to ensure that there are certain, like the Shulchan Aruch writes by Bishul Akum Mishum Chasnus, we don't want our children to intermarry. So fine. So we have a lot of guidelines. This may well be connected.
You couldn't have a free doctor.
Why?
And if you touch them, they're like
They spit on you.
Do they spit on you?
Yeah, the roke has the same
If you
thing.
touch his you don't become. It's no problem.
Their tummy, I think it's too much. I think if they like sit on something like too much medrash, I think that's how it works. Not totally sure. Not very sure. Not sure. Anyways, here's a din derabanan. That's why he said in the upper what's it called, the shuk elyon, that it was considered problematic because there was a laundromat there and there was a lot of nachrim, and there we had the din derabanan. Amar of Chanina arudos hayu nochrim b'Yerushalayim. There was a particular area where the non-Jews were doing nechira, as mentioned I think yesterday, a couple of days ago. Nechira is the way we kill animals that isn't halachic. So this was done by goyim. They were killing animals because they wanted to cut the meat and give them to lions. That's what the Meforshim here point out for the king. The Gemara says it's a little bit hyperbolic. It wasn't actually the case, but it says that there was a lot of blood up to their ankles. So it doesn't mean that there was that much blood. Same lashon from Sachin, but by the korbanos and the Gemara. Exactly, right. So it's a very strange language to use in a comparative, because we're talking about non-kosher animals that were being fed to other non-kosher animals. But nevertheless, Adar was saying that it was a lot of blood. So everyone who was near that blood had a shaila. Is that blood make me tummy? I'm going to the Beis HaMikdash. It's Yerushalayim. It's Shas HaRegel. And I just walked through the street. I stepped in the blood of the donkeys, the arudos, that they were cutting up to feed to the lions. Am I tummy? So they asked the Shiloh, Vo lifnei chachamim, 5 lines down, v'lo amar len davar. They didn't say anything problematic at all, no problem at all. And this brings us back to a story that we saw in this Masechta in full. So this part we can do a little quickly. It says the Gemara as follows, 6-7 lines down, right after the parentheses, Reb Simon, b'shem Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, Ma'isa b'pirda Mishal Beis Rebbe. There was a mule or a donkey in front that belonged to Rebbe that died. V'tiaru estameh mishum nevela. And there, some of the Gedolim there said that the blood of this animal, some of the blood exited the body when the animal died. They said, it's no problem, you're not tameh mishum nevela. So Rabbi Elazar sha'al Reb Simon. Rabbi Elazar was sitting there. He's like, Reb Simon, you got to give me pshat. Reb Simon was the one who quoted Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi. And he says, tell me, what's the shiur? Ad kama. How much blood is not problematic? Revi is how much, a gallon? What are we talking about? So says the Gemara that Reb Simon ignored him. Below agive, he didn't respond. Tiguva in Hebrew is a response. He didn't respond to him. So sha'il Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi went over his head. Reb Simon quoted Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi. So Rabbi Elazar went to the source. He went to Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi and said, okay, I'll ask him instead. Amar le, ad Revi's tahar yoser mikan tameh. So Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi answered him. The amount that isn't problematic is up to a Revi's. But if mamish ada arkuvo saying, if you're mamish stepping in, gallons and gallons, it's going to be a big problem. You're going to be tameh, and that's a big problem for the Beis HaMikdash. So Rabbi Elazar was annoyed that Rabbi Simon didn't answer him. Uvash, Rabbi Lezer, the Lo Chazer, Rabbi Simon Shmuasab was annoyed that he didn't get an answer from him. And similarly, the following story also took place where the answer was not given. Rav Bibi Havayasa, he was sitting and learning. Masne Hadein Uvda, and he repeated this story about the Pirda Shel Beis Rebbe that had died. Amar le Rav Yitzchak bar Bizna ad kama, and he said, Rav Yitzchak bar Bizna says to Rav Bibi, how much blood is problematic? Amar le, do we say ad Ravis tahar yosem ikantame? Do we use the Ravis as the threshold at which point the dam of a nevela becomes problematic? So less is fine, but more than a Ravis or more is problematic. And what did Rav Yitzchak answer him? Nothing. Not Rabbi Yitzchak. What did Rabbi Bibi answer him? He says nothing. He kicked him. It doesn't mean literally. He just kind of brushed him off and he didn't answer the shaila. Amar le Rav Zerika was watching this interaction. He's like, what are you doing? Begin to have a shaila because he came over to ask you a shaila. Ad baidbe. Every time somebody asks you a shaila, you kick him out of the room. What's going on here? Answer his shaila. What are you kicking him out of the room for? He's a Talmud. He's asking Rabbi a shaila. Answer him. What's the problem? So Amar le Rabbi Bibi says, I'm sorry, my head's not with me today. Begin delo havas daiti bi. My emotions are all over the place. Why? Because he was thinking about something totally unrelated. We're asking the shaila of how much dam of an avail is problematic. His brain was elsewhere. Where was his brain? Says the Gemara as follows: 1/3 of the way down, 1/4 of the way down. The Amar of Chanin. The pasuk writes that your life is hanging in front of you. That's a person who says, I only have enough money to buy a year's worth of grain. What is the next part of the pasuk? The next level of fear is not annual, but it is day and night. That's a person who buys. You're buying for a week at a time. You're buying in smaller chunks than a year. What's the next part of the pasuk? You can't even rely on your own life. That's the person who's taking from a baker day by day. They don't know what they're eating tomorrow. They woke up in the morning. They went to the store. They bought a loaf of bread. That's all they had for the day. They didn't know what they were going to eat tomorrow. So that level is that's the hardest level to live on. When you're eating, it's hand to mouth. So says the Gemara. Rav Bibi says about himself. That's how I live. I'm only getting my money. I'm only getting my food with the money I have. It's one day at a time. And he says that's what the pasuk means. So my emotions were all over the map. So he came over and asked me a nuanced question in Hilchos Nevela. Is the dam of a Nevela less than a? He's like, my brain was not there. I was not ready to answer. So I kicked him out of the room. It was because of me. It was because of him. So he's like, okay, good. But tachlis, can you give me an answer to the shayla? No. That says the Gemara, my kedon. What is halacha? Just tachlis. Tell me what I'm supposed to do. So hey, Rabbi Yeshua ben Pisora. Rabbi Yeshua ben Pisora says, we saw this Gemara already. Al dam nevelo shiutar. He says there's no problem at all. At any shiur, at any volume, there's no problem with dam nevelo. Mahu tahor. So what does that mean? That it's tahor. Tahor milahach shiur. Halitame mitame. Maybe we halitamos mitame. Maybe we shouldn't say that it's tahor mamish. Maybe what Rabbi Pisora means is just that it's tahor milahach shiur. That is as one of the 7 liquids that can transfer tuma from one item to another. Let's say you have an apple that's tahor and another apple that's tahor, and it gets a drop of dam nevela on it. And then the dam nevela touches the 2 apples, the moisture of the blood between the 2. Does tuma transfer from one to the other? So that's a good question. So says the Gemara, maybe we should say it's only tahor milahach shiur, that the blood of a nevela can't cause for hachshara. However, maybe we should say halitamos mitame. So it's not so pashut like Rabbi Yeshua. Maybe we could explain Rabbi Yeshua differently. Says the Gemara, Taman Taninan, we learned in another Mishnah the following: Dam hasheretz mitame kibisaro. That when it comes to the blood of a sheretz, the blood of the sheretz is mitame, just like the meat of the sheretz. Okay, continues this brayta. Mitame ve'eno machshir. It can cause tuma, but it is not able to transfer tuma from one item to another. The blood cannot be a machshir. So it says Gemara that you were not allowed to have that. So then we're really stuck, because you wanted to say that our case of dam nevela was like sheretz, namely that it could cause for tuma. The liquid of dam can cause tuma, but it's not machshir. It can cause tuma to make you tummy, but it doesn't make 2 fruits. It doesn't function as a liquid that's machshir. So it says the Gemara, kishir tumaso. What does it mean? Ve'ein lanu kayotzebo. It just means kishir tumaso. It's only talking about shiurim. Aval damo metame kibisaro bataka. It still is the case that by nevela the dam can be metame like basar, and the uniqueness of the sheretz is its shiur of tuma, which is a much smaller amount than we would have had by a nevela. That's what it meant when it said ein lanu kayotzebo. Amar Rav Yossi pligi batrain amorain. There's a machlokas amorain about this. Chad amar tahor, v'chad amar tameh, v'chad amar tahor. Machlokas. We don't know exactly what the status is of the dam of a nevela, because we were unclear in the Tanaim. We saw 2 shitas already. One said that it's totally fine, and the other says that it's not totally fine. So we're seeing here in the amoraim the same machlokas. Manda Amar Tamek Rabbi Yehuda. The one who says that the dam of a nevela is problematic is like Rabbi Yehuda. Manda Amar Tak Rabbi Yeshua ben Pesor. The one who says that it's tahor is because, like Rabbi Yeshua ben Pesor just said, that it's tahor mamish, like we just saw a few lines ago. Amar le Rav Avduma demin nechosa v'yeus. It has to be correct that Rabbi Yehuda is the one who holds tameh, because Rabbi Yehuda moraina debein nesiyah, because Rabbi Yehuda sat on the bezdin in the time of Rebbe. And he was the one who paskin the shaila about the pirda, about the mule of Rebbe, and he paskin that it was tamei. So now we know that the one here in the Gemara who says tamei must be like the shita of Rabbi Yehuda. That was the Amora who was following in line with Rabbi Yehuda. At the 2 dots, halfway down, getting there. I hope we make it tomorrow. Kol harokin lo chein amar Rabbi Abahu b'shem Rabbi Yossi ben Chanina lo gazra la rokin shebir shalayim. Our Mishnah says that there was a gzera on rok. However, we see over here, lo gazra la rokin. So which one is it? Says the Gemara, Heitmar alei Rabbi Avin b'shem Rabbi Shuban Levi Kitzran shel Nachem hayasham. It's true in most of Yerushalayim there was not a gzera, but there was a gzera in the upper parts of Yerushalayim where they had that laundromat. Last of the short lines here, B'shar Yemos Hashana Hatmein. We said that the people throughout the year, the Tmein Mahalchin Shiboles. Shiboles here, unique use of a word. But in the context of the Gemara, it means that they were walking in the middle of the road. Like we saw in our Mishnah, with a little bit of a different language. Michael, this was to your point. The people who were tahor, they would walk, they wouldn't say anything about themselves. Anytime someone was tameh and they came closer, they said, "Get away, we're tameh." The mamash say it out loud. "Get away, we're tameh. You don't want to become tameh." What about b'shas haregel? During the times of the shas haregel, when it was the gimel, the shalosh regalim, hatohor mahalchin shiboles, those who were tahor would walk in the middle. Vatmein mahalchin b'tzad. And then at that time, hatmein mahalchin stam, because the Tmein would just sit there quietly. They were walking on the side, leave me alone. And if a Tameh person came over to them, it must have been some indicator, they'd say, Proshu, get away from me. What is this talking about? We said that there is a din in our Mishnah, the status of Kalim that are found, whether or not they're Tameh and Tar. We see here in this price that there was no Gzera on the Kalim in Yerushalayim, yet our Mishnah seems to say that there was. Answers the Gemara, the fact that it was found specifically on the path that was to the doorway of the Kalim mikvah, that itself was problematic enough. Completely unrelated, the Gemara shifts gears, a perfect pivot to a totally different topic. We spoke about this in our Mishnah in brief, which is that the Kalim, which are definitely problematic as it relates to Tumah, are ones that are used for burial. So it says Abba Shaul Hayakore Osan Tziporin. There was the one that's in our Mishnah, which is referred to as Maritza. He used to call it as a Tziporin. My Manda Amar Tziporin Shayadoma Tziporin. It looked like a shovel, like our shovels that we think about. It kind of had like the shape of a nail, a semicircular, a gentle curvature. It looked like a nail. However, Manda Amar Maritza, the one who says that it was actually called Maritza, like the time of our Mishnah, Maritza, as Evan the Beis HaKvaros, because when they were digging and they would find a big rock in the ground, they would use this type of sledgehammer, whatever it was, to break this in the Beis HaKvaros. What about the kofitz? We spoke about this in our Mishnah, about this, the meat cleaver, Tani Hasakin Kshur Lo Harezeh Kemosa. This is an exact quote. It's very interesting why this is included. Nevertheless, it brings us to Halacha Beis, the last one for the night, and we have to get there in the next 9 minutes, which we will. Chaf Aleph Amud Beis, we got it. Chaf Aleph Amud Beis, 2/3 of the way down. Halacha Beis Masnisin. Paroches, of course, we know in the Kodesh HaKodashim, what separated the Kodesh from the Kodesh HaKodashim in the Holy of Holies. So in the Holy of Holies was the Aron Abris. And that's in the Kodesh HaKodashim. It was behind the Paroches. That was 20 amos deep. And then for the next 40 amos, as we saw the other day, we saw that there was a Mizbeach HaZahav, we saw that there was a menorah, and we know there were a couple of other Kalim that were there. Fine, the Shulchan. So says the Gemara, what would happen if the Paroches got Tameh? Paroches Shenitmeis. If the paroches became tameh, it had, like anything else, it would have to go to the mikvah, and it would also have to wait for Herav Shemesh. It would have to wait out the day to make sure that it would wait until the sun sets, and then the halachic status of tumah would fall away from the paroches. So the Gemara makes two different case scenarios here. Paroches shenitmes bevlad hatuma. We've seen this language before. What's a vlad hatuma? The child of Tuma, namely a Rishon L'Tuma. It's not an Ava Tuma. It's something that, like, let's say an Ava Tuma touched it, it became that. Now it's a Rishon L'Tuma. So if the Paroches is a Rishon L'Tuma, what do we do? Says the Gemara, first line of the Mishnah in Halacha Beis, Madbilan Osa Bifnim. You can wash it even in that room. You can put it in a mikvah even in that room. Umachnisin Osamiyad. You can hang it right back up because it's only a Rishon L'Tuma. It's not really Rishon L'Tuma. These are Dinei Derabanan. But Midoraisa, the only Tuma that we're talking about is an Ava Tuma. This wasn't an Ava Tuma. So because it was only a Vlada Tuma, Rishon L'Tuma, therefore you can put it in the mikvah there and you can put it right back up. What if in fact the parochas became tummy with an Ava Tuma? So then the halacha is different. Then Makbilan Osa Bachutz, you have to take it out of the mikdash entirely. You have to wash it outside. And you would lay it outside in a place that's outside the Azara, outside of the mikdash area, because it had to be somewhere where it had to wait, mipnei, because she tzricha herav shemesh. We had to wait until the sunset in order after the mikvah, in order for this kli, for this parochas to become tahor yet again. Third line of the Mishnah, Chadasha, when it was a new one, there was a gzer derabbanan that every new paroches also had to be brought to the mikvah. So if this paroches was brand new, then shotchen osal al gag ha'itztaba. They would lay it on basically on a top public area, and people could see it from afar, and it was gorgeous. So they wanted to show it off. Get a new paroches, you want to show it to everyone. So when they made a new paroches, and they made two every year, when they would make a new paroches, they would before they would use it, they would stick it in the mikvah, and then while it was drying, they would show it to everyone to let it dry out in public. Fourth line of the Mishnah, Rashbag Omer Mishum Rabbi ben Askan Paroches Ovia Tefach. The thickness of the paroches was a tefach. You have to understand what that means. Solid thread, 4 inches thick. I mean, that is a very thick garment. That's even no carpeting is like that. That's extremely thick, extremely heavy. And we'll see at the end of the Mishnah how heavy it was. Al shivim u'shtayim nimin ne'ereges. There were 72 layers of fabric, of thin layers of thread. It's like 72 levels of weaving. It's a lot of material. Al kol nima v'nima kaf dalet chutin, and according to some shitas, we'll see others in the Gemara, that each thread was 24 chutin, 24 strings thick. Orka mem ama v'rachba kaf. The length and width was 40 tall by 20 wide. Umi shmonim v'shistim, 82 ribo, 82 times 10,000. So 820,000 haisanates. It was made out of 820,000 machlokes. If they're talking about threads, if they're talking about money, whatever it is, the Gemara is going to refer to this as a guzma momentarily, that this is just an extremely large number. Why did they pick this number? Good for the Mefarshim to explain. But nevertheless, it's a very large investment. It was a very expensive paroches. V'shtayim mosim b'chol shana, they'd make 2 every year. V'shlosh meos kohanim ad bilano. So it took 300 people to carry. Now we know from shots, we've seen this 15, 20 times already. The number 300 is used regularly when being exaggerative. So lav dafka that it actually took 300 people. One of the Mefarshim actually made a cheshbon of how many linear tefachim there were around, and they said that 300 Kohanim could get both of their hands on it, but only if you held that an amma was 6 tefachim, like they mamish got down to the nitty gritties. Nevertheless, it's probably just a hyperbole. The Gemara opens, Ilu amar chut echad kaful shnayim. When it says chut, it means 1 string. Kaful, double, means 2 strings. And the word shazur would mean l'shlosha. And mashzar, which means like a mix of all of them, is l'shisha, 6 of them. Okay, well, there was 4 materials. There was these were the 4 things that the parochas was made out of, and if each one had 4, so that's mashzar l'shisha, it's 6 times 4 is 24. Mikan ha'esrim v'arba. Good, that's how you get to 24. However, another brisa says that our Mishnah, which says 24, wasn't really right. Each thread was not 24 thick. Tani shloshim v'shtayim. Another brisa says it was actually 32 thick. What was their math? Ilu amar chut echad kaful l'shnayim. If there was 1 string, the word chut means 1, kaful means 2, shazar means la'arba, some type of braid means 4, mashzar means lashmona. So if mashzar is the final product, which we know that it is, that it was this type of sophisticated braid, and if it was lashmona and you have the same 4 contents of thread of tchelis argument tolah shani v'sheish, these 4 different kinds of thread, so 8 times 4 hatzalas and v'train, that's 32. Good. So that's how he figured out. That's how this brisa figured out that it was 32 thick. And the Gemara presents yet another option. Tana arba'im v'shmona. According to some, it wasn't 24 and it wasn't 32. It was 48 strings thick. Unbelievably thick. Ilu amar chut, if the word chut means echad, kaful, shnaim means double, so it's 2. The word kli as a braid, minimum for a braid is 3, l'shlosha, shazor is l'shisha, and mashzar is l'shnei masar. So l'shnei masar is multiplied again by tcheles argument tola shani v'sheish. It's going to be 12 times 4. Ha'arba'im v'shma v'tmanya. Basically, there was a lot of thread going on here. It was very expensive and it was very, very heavy. And it took a lot of people to tovel it. Then there's a machloket about what the psukim meant when it says ma'aseh rokem and ma'aseh choshev, 2 different languages that are used by the paroches, and the Gemara is going to detail what this discussion is. It says the Gemara, kasev echad omer ma'aseh rokem, kasev echad omer ma'aseh choshev. So how do we know? Is it rokem? It's embroidery. Ma'aseh choshev, it was made with artistry. So ma'aseh rokem, parts of echad. According to the one who says that it's ma'aseh rokem, how do we define that? The word rokem means parts of echad. It was like a profile, a picture of a face of an animal, maybe a lion. We'll see in a minute. Ma'aseh choshev, what does that mean? Shnei partzufos, that it had 2. It had both sides of the face, possibly 1 on each side of the paroches. Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Nechemia, this is the machlok. Echad amar ma'aseh rokem, arimi kan ve'arimi kan. You might see in your Gemara the gears is flipped. So I'm just reading what I have here in the Oz V'Hadar. But Chad Amar Ma'aseh Rokem Arimi Kan ve'Arimi Kan. Ma'aseh Rokem means that on each side there was a half profile face of a lion. Ma'aseh Choshev Arimi Kan ve'Chalak Mikan. But Ma'aseh Choshev, according to this first approach, is that where you might see an animal profile on one side and ve'Chalak, smooth, nothing on the other side. V'charna, the other person, Omar, he says, no, it's the opposite. Ma'aseh Rokem Arimi Kan ve'Chalak Mikan. He reverses them and says that Rokem, the embroider, was only on one side, not on both. Chalak on the other side. Ma'aseh Choshev Arimi Kan ve'Nesher Mikan. And according to Ma'aseh Choshev, there was a lion on one side and a nesher, an eagle, on the other side. So these are, we don't know. Well, when
it's a vulture.
Yes, we'll be able to.
Nesher is a vulture.
I'm so sorry. I just have to catch Marv in literally 60 seconds. I have to finish, and then I'm happy to take a question afterwards. The Shmonim Mushtayim Ribo Haisa Nases. What does it mean with 820,000? It was purchased or made. Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Bizna B'Shem Shmuel Guzma. This number is not meant to be taken literally. It's just meant to be a guzma, an exaggerative idea to show how special it was. Taman Taninan. And over there, we also learned Pamim Haya Alesh Kishlosh Meos Kor, that there were 300 kor. That's a massive unit of measure of the deshen, of the ashes by the Beis Hamikdash. We saw this in Maseches Summit as well. Rabbi Yossi, Bey, Rabbi Bun, B'Shem Shmuel, Guzma, this too was exaggerative. Mir Hashem, tomorrow night we'll pick up at Halacha Gimel, the bottom of Kafal Beis. Marv starts in 40 seconds.
Nesher is a vulture, not an eagle. A Nesher is a vulture, not an eagle.
Oh, I didn't know that. I thought a Nesher was it's a vulture.
Yeah, we grew up with an eagle too.
What? I don't know.